When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Skims or Allbirds, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and great marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling and for shoppers buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. It's home of Shop Pay, the #1 checkout in the world. You can use it to boost conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going through to checkout. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/income, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/income to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/income.
Hi everyone, I'm Deb Flashenberg. Welcome to Yoga, Birth, Babies, a podcast produced by Prenatal Yoga Center. We will be diving into everything prenatal yoga, birth, and baby related, hoping to inspire, educate, and empower you through your journey into motherhood. Thank you for listening.
Hi, I'm Deb Flashenberg, and I'm your host of Yoga Birth Babies. And today we're going to talk about advocating for your child. We're particularly focusing on IEPs, Individualized Education Programs. And I will be honest, both my kids have IEPs, and it's something that I have honestly stressed out throughout the years of them having them, the different IEP meetings and the documentation we need and keeping them having their IEPs. And I know I'm not alone. My son got an IEP when he was just 4. So when my guest, Paula Yost, approached me to talk about this, I thought, well, I know a lot of our listeners are on the younger side with their kids. It's still important because I recognize that he had some needs early on that needed to be addressed. So we're going to talk about what are IEPs, what are some signs that kids might need them, preparing for IEP meetings, what does it mean to have an advocate, when do things get to the legal point where you need to actually hire a lawyer, how to advocate for your kids. There's so much that if you're heading down that path, you want support and need to know. I'm really excited for you to get some of these answers. But let me tell you a little bit about my guest. So Paula Yost is a seasoned attorney and a mental health clinician who brings a multidimensional perspective that blends legal precision with human compassion. She is deeply committed to what she calls legal social work, advocating for individuals at the intersection of law and mental health. She's got some great points about how to be the best support and advocate for your kid so that they get the support they need as they grow and learn and get educated. Before we get to that conversation, I always love to give updates about what's happening at Prenatal Yoga Center. The best thing you can do is check out our website, prenatalyogacenter.com. That's going to have our latest workshops and classes, our on-demand courses, and our teacher training. Everything is there, including, I think we're at almost 500 episodes of the podcast. So all that is there, years of blogs and even free videos. So check that out, prenatalyogacenter.com. I also want to say thank you to the listeners. You have taken me seriously when I said, reach out if you have topics or people that would be good for the podcast. And that's how I found Paula. Someone reached out to me saying this would be a great topic. So I'm excited that I'm offering you what you want to hear. So keep it coming. Reach out to me at deb@prenatalyogacenter.com with your ideas or your people. I also have a favor to ask you, our listener. Please take a moment and leave a rating and review wherever you're listening to your podcast from. It really helps people find the podcast. And the whole purpose of the podcast is to support the community through education and stories. So please leave a rating and review. All right, I think that is enough for me. We're going to take a super quick break. When we come back, please enjoy my conversation with Paula.
Welcome to a new era of baseball's great spectacle, the T-Mobile Home Run Derby, live on Netflix. The biggest sluggers in baseball put their talents to the test on All-Star Weekend. Raw power meets star power. Big swagger meets bigger slams. And you don't swing to make contact. You swing to make history. Watch the T-Mobile Home Run Derby live on Netflix, Monday, July 13th at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific.
Hi, Paula. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Absolutely. So I'm really excited to speak to you about this topic. I happen to have two kids, both with IEPs, and I have a lot of friends that also have kids with IEPs, and it is a battle for some. And I feel like those that are in this boat or feel like they're approaching this are often overwhelmed. So I'm really excited to pick your brain.
Oh, good. I hope I can say some stuff that will be helpful.
So before we jump into the world of IEPs, why don't you just share a little bit about yourself and about your path and what led you into it and what you call legal social work?
Sure. So I am an attorney. I went straight to law school after college, so I didn't have like a gap or anything. I became a lawyer when I was 25, which seems crazy, but I did. And then I had my first child about 8.5 years later. And I do think my legal education helped me, but it didn't help me as much as other people think it did, because very rarely do law schools teach students anything about educational law. So I literally didn't have any background in education law or even really think about the need for education law until I had my first child named Pratley. And so Pratley was born with a complete bilateral cleft lip and palate. So he did not have a roof in his mouth. Most of his nose was missing, and he did not have an upper lip at birth. And so he had to have a tremendous amount of speech therapy as a baby. He had to have multiple surgeries. And then he really needed to have speech therapy, like good quality speech therapy. And I was going to take him to the public school because that's what you do. You know, you enroll a 3-year-old with a pre-existing condition in public school for special education services. And it was a fight. It was a miserable fight from the beginning to the end. And it was one of the most frustrating situations that I've ever found myself in. And so that's what really got me focused on this, is everything I had to go through with him.
Thank you for being so open and honest about that. I often find those that have kind of that fire in their belly to help others is because they had a situation and a struggle themselves. So thank you for sharing that. So we're going to talk about IEP. So for someone that's new to this, what is an IEP and when should a parent start to think about one?
So an IEP is a legal document. It is called an Individualized Educational Plan. And the reason that IEPs are important is because they can follow your children all through their education. So there are people that will take the bar exam or the medical boards this year and will be granted extra time on those exams because of a medical condition that they may have been diagnosed with as kindergartners. So dyslexia, dysgraphia, ADHD, there's a huge number of things that could cause your children to need some sort of supplementation to their educational plan. But the key word that I like to make sure parents know is FAPE. Free, appropriate public education. Like every child in the United States is legally and constitutionally entitled to a free, appropriate public education. But for some children, you're not going to be able to get a free, appropriate public education if you don't have an individualized education plan because you have some sort of medical condition or learning disability. So that's why these documents are really important. They follow you all the way through school. They can impact your long-term career, and they have huge, huge factors to your overall educational picture.
I had no idea that after 12th grade, they could still be implemented. So as mentioned, both my kids have IEPs, and I really have kind of fought to keep them. And because the state is very quick to take them away.
They are.
And they're so quick. Actually, when we moved from New York to New Jersey, everyone told me, do not lose that IEP, because New Jersey is very quick to take them away, and New York is actually very quick to give them out. So we held on to it.
To clarify too, it's not that the IEP follows you to college. It's that the legal diagnosis that is in there and the plan and the tracking of all of that. Those are the things that the dean's office wind up using to still grant you additional
like extra time
services.
and support. That makes, okay, thank you for clarifying that, because I thought it ended at 12th grade. But so you're saying, I'm always very transparent. So like my daughter has dyslexia. So she gets extra time on things. And sometimes, if it's a big passage, sometimes she has things that are read to her. So that's the kind of thing when she's looking at colleges, we take to the dean and they're like, okay, you can have extra time on X, Y, and Z test.
Correct.
Oh, this is helpful. So I love that, getting something like you said in kindergarten. Actually, my son got an IEP when he was 4, and he had it in preschool, and kind of, he still has it now as a freshman. So it's interesting to see how this one document can, as you said, like really affect the trajectory of their education.
It can. It's really, really important. And so not enough parents understand how important it is, because it is a legal document. And so when you go into these IEP meetings, it is very important that you get the things that you feel like your child needs documented. Because if you just suddenly show up at college one day and you're like, yeah, I need extra time on a test because of whatever reason, then the college is going to be very loath to do that unless there's some sort of documentation that like this is something you've always had.
That makes a lot of sense. So what are some early signs a parent might notice that their child may need some additional support?
Oh, goodness. So I think things like not progressing in a way that you think they should. So if it becomes obvious to you, like my child is flipping letters around, my child is really, really struggling to understand their basic schoolwork. The teacher is telling me that the child is struggling to understand and the child is struggling to follow the basic schoolwork. Those are usually the red flag indicators that there's a problem going on. And usually what happens when you have that is your child is going to need additional testing. And so some of the time the school system will give you the additional testing that your child needs, but sometimes that becomes an additional fight. If you live in a larger city, I usually think it's a really good idea to be able to get the educational testing done independently, because then you know what you're actually dealing with. The schools sometimes don't give you the correct answer, or they miss something. But if you're dealing with your own independent physician, they don't have any bias or agenda. And so you know that whatever you get told by a private doctor is going to be correct.
That's interesting. When my son got his IEP at 4, so backstory is I'm dyslexic. So I had thought my son would be. Funny, he is not. My daughter is. I was told to reach out to the New York Board of Education, and they actually ran a myriad of different tests. And he now has later diagnosed with ADHD, but he had poor motor skills. So they actually gave him an IEP for OT 3 times a week. And then he got, I guess, kind of reevaluated heading into kindergarten. And that's what they told us often happens. And so when we then had to get reevaluated, we asked in New Jersey if we could have our own independent. And I guess this could be state by state, but they were really hesitant to have an outside. They would not take that much of an outside point of view when it came to testing. So yeah.
What you just described is a common phenomenon. So every state is different. Some states are going to be much more willing to work with whatever you give them. Other states are not. I am of the opinion that, and this is based on my watching children fail over and over and over again.
That's the worst, yeah.
The school systems tend to make your children produce a record of failure.
Yeah, isn't that the craziest? You have to fail to get support.
Yes.
That drives me crazy.
So they will make your children produce a record of failure before they will wind up offering them a correct and accurate educational plan. The problem with the fact that they do that is that you are missing out on invaluable time that your child could be learning how to read the way they need to read. Like, for instance, with dyslexia, I've had moms say, heard moms say from like K through 3, I think this child is dyslexic. And they'll have teachers say, well, maybe they'll probably grow out of it. They're reversing some letters. That's normal, but let's just see if they grow out of it. Now, there are some children that do, but there's certainly children who don't. And for every year that you've sat there being like, well, let's see, that's a year that child could have been getting therapy. That child could have been having someone help them know their awareness of what's going on. They could have been studying the Gillingham method. There's all kinds of things that could have been going on during that time period that weren't, because we were waiting on them to fail. And so
I know, that's the worst. It's so heartbreaking when you hear
horrible. It's horrible. So if I am, and this is another horrible ramification of just income inequality in the United States. If you are a parent and you think your child is having any form of educational issue and the school is not listening to you, I think you are better off to go and pay for a private psychologist to evaluate your child and give you an actual answer as to what is going on. Because even if the school does not want to honor and accept that document, it is still fuel for you to use in an IEP meeting. But more importantly, it is a document that then will enable you to be able to go to the school and say, or to go and come up with a plan on your own. Like, sometimes you as mom have to get creative. And so if you're not going to be helped by the people who should be helping you, that's where you've got to think outside the box and try the hardest. The only problem with all of that is that there's always going to be those children whose families cannot afford to do that. And those children are truly at the mercy of the system.
So that kind of brings me up to 2 questions. And you might not know this because I'm literally throwing this at you as you're saying, as you kind of spark some thoughts. Are there any type of public funding or pro bono, and you might not know this at all, or any organizations that can help folks that don't have the funds? Because these can get very expensive. Do you know of anything I can point people towards?
The problem with that in most of the country is going to be no. And the reason for that is because the pro bono entity or the free entity that should be doing it is the public school system. That is something you should be constitutionally enabled to receive. So there are not any nonprofits that I am aware of that will fund those, because the attitude is that the public school is supposed to be funding them. And if they're not funding them, then you need to deal with that with the public school. And that also goes back to income inequality, because in my particular circumstance, I wound up suing the public school system, but I am an attorney myself and I'm friends with attorneys. And so I was able to take care of that. If you're not a lawyer or cannot afford a lawyer, the idea of suing the school system is very challenging. And so that goes back to, you kind of have to do the best you can. But some of these families really get locked into a situation where they are, in fact, trapped. That being said, too, that doesn't mean there isn't some form of nonprofit that will fund that, but there's not one that I'm aware of. But it is something that I do think nationwide needs to be started. But quite frankly, I think the attitude needs to be, though, we need, as a country, we need to refocus and think about truly giving our children the very best that we can give them. And if one of them has an issue, we need to be doing everything that we can do to correct that issue. It is so much easier to prevent problems when you have a child than it is to manage problems as an adult.
That's so true. So we're going to take a break, but when we come back, let's talk about one thing every parent should know before walking into an IEP meeting, because I know they can be a bit intimidating because there's a lot of people usually there. So we're going to take a break. When we come back, we will talk about that. We'll be right back.
Tomorrow morning is knocking. Stock your fridge now. How about a creamy mocha frappuccino drink? Or a sweet vanilla? Smooth caramel maybe? Or a white chocolate mocha? Whichever you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Find Starbucks Frappuccino drinks wherever you buy your groceries.
Welcome to Newbies, the podcast for new moms finding their way through the beautiful, messy, and exhausting first year of motherhood. Each episode brings honest conversations, real postpartum experiences, expert advice, and comforting stories from moms who have been there too. From sleepless nights and breastfeeding struggles to celebrating first smiles and tiny milestones. Newbies is here to remind you that you are never alone in this beautiful journey. New episodes drop weekly. Find Newbies wherever you get your podcasts.
Okay, so we are back. So we'll talk about the different documents to have and, go a little bit more into detail in a moment. But what is one thing every parent should know before walking into an IEP meeting?
Do not go into an IEP meeting by yourself. And here's what I mean by that. So before the break, you very wisely said, IEP meetings are a lot. They're kind of crowded in there. Well, they are. When you walk into the IEP meeting, you're going to have a ton of school employees, the teacher, any therapist that your child has. There's also a full-time school system employee who does nothing but attend these meetings and put the documentation for them together. So if you go into an IEP meeting by yourself, or it's just you and your co-parent, you are going to be badly outnumbered. And what I find, what happened with me and what I think happens with a lot of parents is mom or dad go in and they raise a challenge or a concern. I want my child to have X because. And then what happens is the school system will start arguing with you and saying, no, we're not going to do that because, or we can't do that because of whatever reason. And then when mom and dad try to go back with them, what winds up happening is all the school system employees are going to rally around one person. And then it's just going to be you and your partner there. You're going to get ganged up on. So what you need to look for is an advocate. Do not take an attorney to an IEP meeting, because if you take an attorney, the school system's going to say, well, we can't talk to you until we can have our own attorney here. And what they're going to wind up doing is telling you that you cannot do that. And so they will reschedule everything, and then you're waiting 6 months for your child to get the help that they needed. Look for an advocate. There are nonprofits and 501c3s popping up all over the country that are full of people who are willing to, usually for free, attend an IEP meeting with you. In many circumstances, the people who are willing to do this are retired teachers. And in the circumstances where they are not retired teachers, they are usually mothers who have been through this themselves with their own children, who know exactly what to say and do. So take someone else in there with you so you don't get ganged up on.
Oh, I love that suggestion of an advocate. We never did that. We just did it with my husband and I. But let's talk about documents. So I know I'm just going to refer to my own situation with my kids. I know when I showed up from New York to New Jersey, I had the IEP printed out. I had all of the information that I got from the New York School Board of Education presenting. So I had a lot of special documents and notes. What should people bring? And also, is there any language in particular parents should use to support their kids and also be taken seriously?
So yeah, if you've got an independent psychological evaluation, that we talked about in the first half, bring that. Doctor's notes, bring those. I think it's huge if you have some documentation from a medical doctor that says, in my circumstance, this child needs 30 minutes of individualized speech therapy 4 days a week. That is very helpful. Now, the school might tell you we're not going to honor that, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't still bring it to try to make your case. If you've also got things like your child's a handwriting sample that shows, what they're doing educationally, anything like that is helpful. So I am a big fan of bringing all of it together. It doesn't mean the school is going to honor it. They might argue with you or dismiss some of it, but I think it's always better to come in with more rather than less.
That makes a lot of sense. All right, so let's switch gears a little bit to talk about working within the system. And I know it's a little messy within the education system, but where is there flexibility in the system that parents might not realize they can actually use to their advantage?
That one's a real challenge for me because every single school district and situation is going to be different. And so what will work for you in New Jersey might not work for you in Delaware.
That makes sense, of course.
I tend to think that the best advocate that you can have is a teacher who you know agrees with you. Some of the time, I have very rarely ever met a teacher who I wasn't on board with. It's usually the administration that's trying to moderate costs that becomes more of an issue. So I would just try to look around the room and think, who are my allies? I also want to add too, you can always walk out of an IEP meeting. People don't realize that they can do that. I have a great friend who, she's actually a police officer. She went to an IEP meeting recently and they were working on her son's educational plan. And one of the people at the meeting said, by the way, this thing's going to have to be done before 3:45 because I have somewhere to go. And so she just looked at her and picked up her keys and her drink and stood up and started walking out. And they were like, where are you going? And she said, you just told me you don't have time to take care of my child today, so we can reschedule this for when you do.
Oh, wow. I like that. She was advocating for her kid.
And she wasn't ugly. She didn't say anything mean or nasty. She just picked up her stuff and went to walk out. And they were halfway through the meeting at this point. And that kind of stopped. She came back. The meeting went on for another however long. It was way past 3:45. But she walked out of there with documents that she was happy with. Mm-hmm. So always know that. Like the school has a deadline on when these things get done. And so if they're being ridiculous and you just feel like you're not able to get what you need, you're always able to reschedule that meeting by just simply leaving.
I hadn't thought about that. So when something isn't working, so clearly you could walk out, but are there other steps parents can take before it starts to get escalated to a legal aspect? Or before they have to hire a lawyer?
Anything that you can do on your own outside of school. So if you can afford to get your dyslexic child some therapy or some tutoring that specifically caters to their needs, there is a wonderful national organization called Linda Mood Bell that specifically assists children with learning disabilities with being able to be more reading proficient. But again, the problem with all that is the expense. Things like that are not cheap. And so being able to have the money on hand to invest. But if you can afford it, anything that you or your health insurance company can fund privately is a good decision, and do that. But as far as the school's concerned, no. I mean, if they've just made up their mind that they're not going to help you and you're not getting what you need, you probably don't have any ramification but a lawyer.
I know that some insurance will cover OT and physical therapy, depending on what the situation is. So that might be something, if people have insurance, they may be able to take advantage of. So I know you also want to talk about trauma-informed education. Can you talk about what that is and why you believe educators need that trauma-informed education?
I absolutely can. So as we are seeing, I don't even know how to describe what I see in child welfare these days. We have always had poverty and we have always had child abuse. But the level of poverty and the level of child abuse that we are now seeing in American culture, I do believe is much worse than it has been in the past. It's certainly worse than it was when my legal career started 21 years ago. And I think it's really important for educators to understand some of the time the children who are really acting out in class, that are the most poorly behaved, that the most unfocused, those children are frequently trauma victims. There's something going on with those kids. There's a reason that they are acting out. And when that occurs, I think it's very, very important that educators know that and that they are responding to the trauma. You can't just respond to trauma by punishment. You can't just respond to trauma by sending a kid, to the corner or by disengaging them. You have to respond to a traumatized child with as much love as you possibly can. And we don't do that as much as we should. So I really think being able to help educators understand better the roots of trauma and why children might be acting the way that they are is critical.
So what would that look like in the classroom? Like how do you see that in action, and how can parents recognize if that is something their school utilizes, and I guess even how to bring it up if they don't?
Yeah, so it's usually the kid who is cursing when they shouldn't be at other children or at teachers, bullying in ways that they shouldn't be, angry all the time, destroying classrooms, destroying personal property. And again, I'm not saying you shouldn't punish a child if they're truly doing something wrong, like destroying personal property or injuring a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
But usually that is an escalated behavior that's been going on all year. If you've got a child that just seems like they are obviously not doing very well, there is a reason for that. And it's better to recognize that reason. Some of the time those children are living in they have a parent who's a drug dealer. Some of the time those parents are a trafficking victim. Sometimes they're going home and watching their drunk dad beat the crap out of their mom every night. And you're not going to know that unless you have a relationship with that kid. But if teachers can make those children feel connected and like those children can trust those teachers, those kids will tell you heaven only knows what. And that's what we really need educators to understand. Most children are not inherently bad. There is something else going on with them.
So is trauma-informed education something that is being taught to educators to implement in the classroom? Because honestly, until I connect with you, I had not. I've heard of trauma-informed, and we try to actually practice that through our yoga practice. But I hadn't heard of trauma-informed education. So is that a program that educators are being trained in to then bring into the classroom?
In most states, I believe that they are. Yes.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. Okay, so I have some more questions I want to jump into. Yeah. I want to jump into a little bit of the legal situation. So I am part of a Facebook group for kids that are out of district, and I constantly, and also for a special education in my town, and I'm constantly seeing things like, I'm spending so much on a lawyer. Do I have to get a lawyer? And people are spending thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. So at what point should a parent consider bringing in an advocate or the lawyer to support their child? Where is that breaking point? And yeah, I guess we'll just go there.
So I think the advocate is ideal from the very, very beginning, because the advocate is going to be able to understand these laws. They're going to know what you need to do. They're going to know what to say when they're getting inappropriate pushback. So I think the advocate is always good. You need the lawyer when you feel like the IEP plan that you have is not being followed, and you can't get anyone to follow it, or their school is trying to take your IEP away from you completely. Those are the times where you need a lawyer, especially if the IEP's absence is going to harm your child in the long run.
What does it mean to sue the school district? Like, what are you suing for them to either give an IEP or to follow the IEP? Because I've heard that, like, we're suing the school system, and I never quite understood what that meant.
All of the above. You could be suing them to get an IEP improved. You could be suing an IEP because it is not being followed. I will also add, I do not like suing the school system, because if you think about it, if you sue the school system, you are then not only paying for your attorney, but you are paying for their attorney via your tax dollars. And so often suing the school system is not a satisfying outcome. I sued the school system and I got an outcome. We basically settled out of court, and it really wasn't satisfying. I hoped that by suing, I would be able to teach them that they cannot treat children this way. And what I determined is that they don't care. My son was just a number. They really wanted us to go away. I really wish that instead of suing them, I had just cut my losses and taken every bit of the money that I would have spent on litigation on my son's out-of-pocket speech therapy fees, because I think it would have been more productive and better for him in the long run. However, my son's IEP was originated by speech therapy caused by cleft palate. If my child had had something much more serious, like if I found out that my child with cerebral palsy hadn't had his diaper changed all day, if I found out that, my Down syndrome child had been abused or hit by a teacher when they were at school, if I found out that my autistic child who had a very specific plan for the day and that plan was not being followed and it was damaging my child, those are times when I would sue.
Mm. What is the difference between an IEP and is it a 50?
A 504.
504?
Yes. So an IEP is an individualized educational plan. We talked about IEP in the first half of this. Mm-hmm. A 504 is something that really applies more when you don't have a legal basis for an IEP. So for instance, let's take the child that has been badly traumatized. So let's say you've got a 12-year-old that lived in a drug house where they were sexually molested for 5 years, and they are badly educationally neglected, but they also act out in school. That child probably needs a 504 plan, because being a trauma victim, unfortunately, is not a clinical diagnosis. And so needing more time on a test because of trauma is a 504 reason. A lot of children also need a behavior support plan because of trauma.
Okay, I actually never understood the difference. What does amaze me is there are so many resources, at least I'm going to speak for my school district, because I know they're all different, that can, if you're able to get the support. I was just thinking about the school district I'm at has PT, OT, speech therapy, like pull out for reading. It's amazing what some districts are able to offer. And then if his child does need that, if they're able to get that support, it can make a difference. My daughter, as I mentioned, has dyslexia, really was behind in her grade level, and her first grade teacher noticed, and it took her a couple years to get back up. But the school, and we also did Orton Gillingham outside with some tutoring, they were able to pull her out, I think, 3 times a week for extra reading support, and she was able to get to grade level. So I guess I'm also appreciative that, again, per school district, what is actually possible. So I just wanted to throw that out there for listeners.
And that is absolutely wonderful when you are able to get those resources. If you can do that, that's great. And, and this is one of those things that's frustrating is that, I'd never heard of Orton Gillingham until I had a friend whose child was dyslexic. I didn't know what it was. So often we learn about things like this because of a condition that our children have. Mm-hmm. And so you really do, as mom and dad, kind of have to be your own expert for your kid, because no one's going to know your kid better than you.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to take another break. When we come back, what is one final tip or piece of advice you'd like to offer new and expectant parents? We will be right back.
This episode is brought to you by Accenture. When your advertising operations fall out of sync, everything else follows. Spotify and Accenture are working together to reinvent the rhythm of ad sales, using automation, analytics, and smarter workflows to simplify campaign delivery and access better data across the business. The result? Less time spent on operations, more time connecting brands with the moments and fandoms that matter most. Learn more at accenture.com/Spotify.
Okay, we are back. So what is one final tip or piece of advice you'd like to offer new and expectant parents?
Oh, gosh. I think that I would just like to tell you that this is going to be the greatest, but also the most exhausting time of your life. I remember being so exhausted when my children were babies, and it is a lot, but also just take time to enjoy yourself, keep people away from you as best you can, and just really do what you need to do to take care of yourself and snuggle that little person because you're not going to get these days back.
That's so true. Where can people find your work?
I am on Amazon.com. My book is called Tumbleweeds. And I also have a website, paulayost.com, where you can go and find all kinds of free resources and links to my book and all kinds of stuff.
Thank you, Paula. I'm really feeling confident that those that feel their children need support, you have given them some clear ideas of some paths to take and then some obstacles that they may run into and how to get past those. So thank you for your time and thank you for your wisdom.
Thank you so much for having me.
This has been an episode of Yoga, Birth, Babies, produced by Prenatal Yoga Center. You can catch us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Periscope. I'm Deb Flaschenberg. Thanks for listening.